Del Mar Theater was a fixture for over 60 years on Pacific Avenue until it was shut down about 3 years ago. But tonight, the grand old movie palace is very much alive. After extensive remodeling and a return to business 3 weeks ago, Del Mar tonight was the scene of a gala grand opening. In tune with its past, antique cars were on display tonight after a parade earlier in the evening. Tonight's main feature, the same film that showed when the Del Mar first opened in 1936, China Clipper, starring Humphrey Bogart and Beverly Roberts. That's Beverly Roberts right there, still glamorous at 88. She was the guest of honor tonight. The Del Mar is now owned by the city of Santa Cruz and run by the owners of the Nickelodeon.
We just want everybody to enjoy what we've accomplished here in Santa Cruz and being able to save this grand old movie palace, which we think is not only a historic landmark, but a community meeting place. And especially since we lost so many historic buildings in the earthquake, and buildings like the Cooper House, it's nice to have a place like the Del Mar that people remember from their childhood and that kids can see in the future.
In addition to the movie and the parade, tonight's festivities included a celebrity look-alike contest and a reunion of usherettes.
Of the historic Del Mar Theater. And our architect, Artie Lerner, of Lerner and Associates, made the application on the city and the joint venture's behalf, and we're the happy recipients tonight.
The Del Mar Theater is a movie palace that was built in Santa Cruz in 1936, and it was designed to be a flagship of the Golden State Theater chain. So they put the best of everything that they had into it at the time, feeling that putting it in a tourist town like Santa Cruz would give it higher exposure than in some of the other places where they had theaters. Santa Cruz at the time had a very strong convention industry, and they were running out of rooms in their existing halls, and so in addition, the Del Mar was designed so that it could hold conventions as well as have vaudeville shows on their 23-foot stage.
United Artists had let the theater deteriorate over the years. At the height of the kind of dot-com boom, there were people coming into the planning department. It was for sale. People coming into the planning department asking if they could put a whole nother level of offices over the auditorium and in many ways destroy the theater. Sometime after that, this group of the investors, the redevelopment agency, and Nickelodeon Theaters, the local theater company that was real popular, came together and made the project happen. So really lucky that it happened, and a great thing that it did happen.
Our next winner is the Del Mar Theater. The Del Mar was the last movie palace constructed in Santa Cruz and helped form the downtown theater district. The restoration and renovation project represents a unique and innovative public-private partnership formed to rescue the Art Deco movie theater, which closed in 1999. The city agency purchased the building and began work with a local team of developers and a long-time art house cinema operator to renovate and restore the facility. At the time the city took ownership, the theater consisted of an exterior shell of peeling paint, a deteriorated grand marquee with no neon remaining, a concession stand with fake wood patterned plastic laminate and broken equipment, and a main auditorium room divided into two theaters with torn screens, inadequate electrical and mechanical systems, and a totally inaccessible facility for the disabled. Renovation of the theater included restoration of the marquee to its original design. A new box office was designed, referencing the original standalone booth, while allowing a connection to the interior. The entry doors into the main auditorium, which were too narrow for accessibility, were cut and rejoined such that when closed, they would appear as original, but when open, provide accessibility. The project has turned a sense of elegance and wonder to the city. Okay, it looks like the Del Mar Theater people are here in force. The Del Mar Theater, Arnie Lerner, AIA Lerner and Associates Architects. Syl Carello, Executive Director. Daryl Doan, Project Coordinator with the Redevelopment Agency of the City of Santa Cruz. Jim Schwentenlery, I slaughtered that, I'm sorry. Chuck Volwimmer. Nickelodeon Theater, Santa Cruz. George Al Jr., Barry Swenson Builder, Swenson Del Mar Theater Venture. Don Lawrenson, Senior Planner with Historic Preservation, Santa Cruz. Don Peoples Associates, and Mel Pettis. And Dave Walsh of Walsh Norris and Associates. Greg King of Greg King Neon. And Ross Eric Gibson of Gibson Consulting. Congratulations.
This concludes the California Preservation Foundation's 20th Anniversary Preservation Design Awards Ceremony. Thank you all for coming, and let's give all the winners another round of applause.
When I felt the earthquake in October 17th, 1989, I went out of my house and looked toward the horizon and saw great smoke rising from the downtown. Yet it wasn't fire, but dust from the crumbling masonry buildings. Much of the downtown lay in ruins, and hasty demolitions were made of some of our best landmarks. The Del Mar was closed, and based on its poor maintenance, it was feared that it was the next for demolition. But miraculously, it only sustained cosmetic damage, and the manager got his insurance company to restore the magnificent lobby ceiling completely. The theater reopened a year later, and back in 1974-75, it had been a popular stage and screen venue hosting live bands, which the Downtown Chamber of Commerce attempted to buy for a performing arts center. But the deal fell apart, and United Artists spent 3 times what it cost to build the building originally in order to divide the auditorium into ugly fourplex, painting the walls black to obscure the off-center screens and the half-proscenium arch. After the earthquake, Redevelopment Agency Director Syl Cirillo begins negotiating with the United Artists so that the city could at last acquire the Del Mar Theater. United Artists proposed that if the city allowed them to build a big multiplex, that they would give up the River Twin and the Del Mar Theater. And it was felt that a multiplex would be a big draw to the downtown, especially after dark. In anticipation of the city's ownership of the Del Mar, the County Cultural Council had AMS consultants make a report on creating the downtown performing arts complex. In 1993, United Artists hadn't even started the multiplex yet, but said that if they didn't have enough screens, they were going to keep the Del Mar, which angered the city council enough that it killed the deal. This break with the city was followed in 1994 by the United Artists splitting with their own developer, who instead built in 1995 the Cinema 9 without United Artists. In 1997, the United Artists put the Del Mar up for sale under the management of Star Cinemas of Pasadena, whose minimal service provided only enough light to grope your way to the seats. And because there was no heat, there was a sign in the window that said, "Bring a coat." I was on the Historic Preservation Commission at the time and wrote a short paper on why it was important for the city to purchase the Del Mar Theater before somebody bought it who didn't like the theater as much as we did. On November 4th, 1999, it was announced the Del Mar was closed forever. A Los Angeles developer appeared on the TV saying that his plans were to gut the building, remove the marquee, install ground floor shops and upper floor offices, and punch holes in the building for new windows. I was now chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission and wanted to make sure that this kind of destruction didn't happen to the Del Mar. So I put a discussion item on our agenda for November the 17th called Protecting the Del Mar Theater. I told my commission that I didn't want to see what happened to the new Santa Cruz Theater happen to the Del Mar. Commissioner Michael Bates said, "But what can we protect? Just the facade?" Well, our staff member, Don Lawrenson, replied, "And the lobby, which can be seen from the street, but that's only if it's a landmark." "Well, of course it's a landmark," Commissioner Hugh Carter replied. "It has our county landmark plaque and is in our historic building survey." But Don said, "No, it's not." "Well, why not?" asked Commissioner David Subach. "The new Santa Cruz Theater is in the survey, and the Del Mar is much more important than that." I said, "I've read at least 2 DPR applications that were drawn up to make the Del Mar a landmark." Don said, "They were never submitted because the UA objected." And I continued, "But it's historic whether they object or not." "True," said Don, "but when the historic building survey was made in 1976, the Del Mar was only 40 years old. So without the owner's approval, it couldn't be listed until it was 50. "My God," I said, "we're flying without a net. If it's not too late, we've got to get the Del Mar listed. Otherwise, we won't have a seat at the table." I volunteered to write the historic evaluation, and Hugh Carter said, "Well, you might as well do the Rio Theater as well, which they also own." Don asked me, "Aren't you afraid you're going to come in as the spoiler, changing the rules at the last minute?" And I said no. Didn't United Artists say that they would negotiate a purchase on the landmark for a city performing arts center and then renege on the plan, both to the city and their developer, changing the rules after getting what they wanted? We'd only be changing the rules back to what it had been for 20 years, when the Downtown National Historic District provided protections that were only lost due to the earthquake. In dissolving the district, the National Trust said there were 10 surviving landmarks that were eligible for the National Register status, chief among them being the Del Mar. Well, as I was writing up the historical analysis, I began looking for a buyer who wanted to save the Del Mar. But I was shocked to hear people quoting the AMS report that it said the building had bad acoustics and major structural issues. So I started looking for that report. It was only 6 years old, but it wasn't in the library, nor the planning department, nor the Chamber of Commerce, nor UCSC. At last, I tracked down a rare copy in the Aptos office of the Cultural Council. Those supposed defects were misquotes, as the acoustics were not concert hall, but merely music hall acoustics, which could be raised to concert hall level by jiffy popping the roof up and out. Yet the Civic Auditorium gained concert hall acoustics and rendered these 2 points moot. So I wrote the 44-page, the Del Mar Action Plan, to refute the misinformation and tell the full story of the Del Mar with strategies for its restoration. In January 2000, my 8-year term on the commission was up, but I was asked to stay on until commission vacancies were filled in March. So that would mean my last hearing as a commissioner would be the March 15th Del Mar hearing. At the event, the United Artists lawyer came up from Denver and said he wanted an extension because his notification was delivered to a seldom used a seldom used UA mailbox. I said, I see no reason to send a room full of people home because United Artists treats this as a low priority. All you have to do is to make a position statement. Are you prepared for that? And he said yes. So he presented his concerns, wrongly assuming the HPC would force him to do business in a one-screen theater, and protested preservation requirements that would hamper an unsympathetic makeover. I said, I heard his concerns, but none of this answered the question of whether the building was historic or not. We hope at least to preserve the marquee and the elaborate lobby. He replied, well, I don't see any that we can't keep the marquee in the lobby. And I said, good, then you have no reason to object to the listing. Well, he still objected, but the commission was unanimous in recommending to the city council that the Del Mar become a landmark, and the council approved landmark status for the Del Mar and the Rio Theater on April 25th. But landmark status only helped limit the damage a remodeling project could do. We needed a sympathetic buyer. In April 2000, I began distributing my report to anyone I could think of. The County Cultural Council, the City Council members, the Chamber of Commerce, Community Television, Thatcher and Thompson Architects, the HPC, and the Planning Department. I asked Nancy Rainey, who had founded the Nickelodeon with her husband Bill, if she'd be interested in buying the Del Mar. She said she'd sold the Nickelodeon, and buying the Del Mar would be seen as competing with her former business. The new owners were Jim Schwenterly and Chuck Vollweiler, who wanted to expand the Nickelodeon and were in the midst of time-sensitive negotiations to buy Movie 1 and 2 on Front Street near Laurel. I contacted my friend Jesse Nichols, Senior Vice President of Barry Swenson Builder. I asked if he could think of any way to save the Del Mar or find a sympathetic buyer. He wanted to show others my report, so I said he could copy it at will and distribute it freely. It was Jesse who gave copies to George Howe Jr. and to the Nickelodeon co-owners. The realtor told me the deal with the Los Angeles man was set to close on August the 15th. Jim and Chuck were about to close the deal on Movie 1 and 2, only the space limitations just weren't giving them what they wanted. George Howe Jr. said, I think the Del Mar would be better fit for you. So Chuck Vollweiler called me for a lunchtime chat. He said he had originally wanted the Del Mar because he wanted a movie palace, but somebody advised him that the Del Mar had structural issues. He said he realized from my action plan that these were misquotes from the AMS report. Since the theater hadn't sold by mid-August, the city proposed a walkthrough of interested parties on August the 18th. Mayor Keith Sugar and Chuck Vollweiler both asked me to accompany them. The group included redevelopment chief Seal Cirillo, developers Jesse Nickel and George Howe Jr., city officials, Nickelodeon's Jim Schwenterly, Jeffrey Dunn of the Community Television Theater, and theater critic Morton Marcus, and Cabrillo historian Sandy Leiden, among others. We each had flashlights, and the place was a mess. At one point, a friendly rat started following me around like a puppy dog, always staying 3 feet behind me, until they started calling him Ross's rat. He'd been dining on stale popcorn and rug runners. When somebody said, "There's nothing left here to save," Chuck asked me, "Well, aren't you going to argue with him?" So I shined a light upwards on a black wall and revealed the sculptural artwork. "It's all still there, just waiting to be highlighted," I said. Out of this walkthrough came the final coalition. The city would buy the building and add an elevator. Swenson-Howe Partnership would restore the structure, and the Nickelodeon partners would install new seats, rugs, curtains, and projector equipment, and operate the theater. Although I learn now that it was George Howe that installed the curtain, or at least paid for it. The city had the rights to use the theater for festivals and special events a certain number of days throughout the year. The host of the popular KRON TV show, Bay Area Backroads, was Jerry Graham, and he had retired to Santa Cruz, and his wife, Catherine, knew Chuck Vollweiler. Chuck said he was concerned about the rapidly approaching reopening gala, fearing certain details had been left undone, which after the opening would lose their urgency to finish them. He asked Catherine Graham to found Friends of the Del Mar to help complete a list of items. Lawrence Bedford bought the Rio Theater in August of 2000 as a live theater venue. He pointed out some Art Deco sconces stored on the Rio stage, which were once part of the Del Mar Theater. We sent them to an auto body shop for smoothing out and painting, and they were then rehung in the Del Mar. On March 2nd, 2002, we closed the street to allow limousine drop-off service and the Santa Cruz High School Marching Band to serenade the new theater, or the newly redone theater. Guests came glamorously dressed, some as celebrity lookalikes, others as drag queens. We replicated the 1936 opening night program and even brought the star, 88-year-old Beverly Roberts, as our special guest. And she said that she hadn't seen the movie since she had shot it. Friends of the Del Mar included a variety of people over the years, with Catherine Graham as president and myself as vice president. Our purpose was to raise funds for the completion of historic details. Our most popular fundraiser was selling $100 plaques for armrest with your name and favorite movie on it. Similarly, we sold $5 stars to hang on the holiday tree bearing your personal message. Among our fundraising events was an historic fashion show, a champagne and chandeliers event, tea on the mezzanine, a silent auction, the Ushers and Usherettes reunion, the Del Mar Marathon, which was a real marathon, not a movie marathon, and Jerry Graham hosted a 1950s Elvis movie. Meanwhile, I was looking for the wayward pieces of the Del Mar, tracking them down and buying 4 of the chandeliers and light fixtures. Meanwhile, we found that there was a mural under the painting of the mezzanine ceiling, so we hired David Subach to uncover it, who was then restoring it along with the 2 small chandeliers, which were hung on the mezzanine. Our Friends Committee was made up of business professionals, giving freely of their professional services, along with retirees who still knew their business, such as our first woman mayor, Lorette Wood, who was short but was always boldly buttonhole anybody she thought could help our cause. She usually got her way. My dear friend Peter McGettigan is a renowned videographer with great ideas. When we had events, He liked to take bottles of $3 Chuck, soak off the labels, and replace them with special events labels. Chuck Vohweiler never complained about his medical issues and passed away. Lorette Wood also died, and Peter McGettigan died as well. Unfortunately, people got busy with work or moved away, so that after 2008, there was no one left to finish raising funds for the remaining work. There are still 2 auditorium chandeliers to finish and hang, and a ceiling mural of the Etruscan queen and her lions that I always thought should be put back. In the end, it's important to know that you are the owners of the Del Mar Theater, because it was the love of this community that saved this wonder of art and beauty for generations to come. In the words of the 1936 opening, "This is a dream come true. We dedicate the Del Mar to Santa Cruz, its citizens, and the strangers who so plentifully pour through her gates every year."
This evening, we'll be touching on the Del Mar in the stylistic context of Art Deco Bay Area theaters, and then the Del Mar in the context of the principal theaters operating in Santa Cruz County at that time, and then the Del Mar, its decorator and designer. Notice I didn't say architect, that's unusual. And its architectural sister theater. You heard a little bit about the Cascade Theater in Reading when we were over at the Del Mar just now. The Del Mar's style in the context of Art Deco, a little bit about the opening night program and its context, and finally, the Del Mar's splendor and my interactions with it through the years. So let's go ahead with the first image. And I'm going to kind of, as I tend to, weave around, so I hopefully don't get in front of anybody's line of sight. I mean, this is about theaters. You're supposed to be able to see the show. Okay, so talking about the Del Mar's context in Art Deco Bay Area theaters. It doesn't get any better than this one. This is the Oakland Paramount. It was one of the very first theaters in the US to be restored accurately. This one and Lowe's, Ohio, and Columbus. Before that, in the 60s, there had been a few movie palaces, like 3,000-seat theaters, as this one is, that had been renovated, painted white inside with gold trim, kind of that 1960s Regency style with crystal chandeliers and all that, and very bright. So very useful, but not necessarily authentic as far as being a movie palace. This would be what was called a presentation house, where for one price, you not only got the feature movie, but a cartoon, a newsreel, and then live on-stage entertainment. The Rockettes at Radio City, that's what you got, but on a smaller scale. But this is about a 3,000-seat theater, now the home of the symphony and various other performing arts groups. Designed by Timothy Pfluger, who also designed the Bay Bridge. Next, please.
Where was that?
Oakland, right on Broadway. Yeah. 3,000 seats. Well, compared to the Radio City Music Hall, which is 6,000, yes. But this is the interior of the Paramount taken when it was brand new. It still looks like this. I mean, this is kind of a wide-angle view, but if you went there today, you would see this, of course, in color. But anyway, this is how it looked when it was new, with its movie title curtain and its main curtain parted, and the grills on either side for a pipe organ. By the time the Paramount was built, sound movies were here to stay, but it was such a grand theater that they did put a Wurlitzer pipe organ in there. Next, please. And I'm showing you 3 in the Bay Area, stellar Art Deco theaters. The Alameda in Alameda, which still shows movies full-time. It does have a small stage and is occasionally used for live events. But this was the same architect, Timothy Pfluger, who did the Oakland Paramount. He only designed 8 theaters from scratch. And this was used for other things at one time. After it was a triplex movie theater, it became a nightclub and an exercise center. And then it was restored about 15 years ago or so. And they built additional screens right next door so it can still carry its weight. This is Alameda's theater. Alameda Island has this glorious thing, and that's the only place you can go for movies there. Poor people. Anyway, but those are the original neon colors. They did a restoration of the vertical sign and marquee. Next, please. Little detail of the interior of the Alameda Auditorium. Down here you have the curtain and the screen and the plasterwork, gilding, and light fixtures above it. Notice the little similarities between those saucer-shaped fixtures and the Del Mar chandeliers up on the mezzanine you saw just a little while ago. Next. And then the other of the big three in the greater Bay Area, the United Artists in Berkeley, sadly imminently threatened with destruction. It has been a sevenplex for many, many years, but its auditorium and everything is still intact behind that. This marquee is unfortunately long gone. It was a victim of the 1960s and 70s trend in removing theater marquees because they were gaudy, etc. Yeah, let's make our downtown a dark, gloomy canyon at night. Good idea. Anyway, yeah, that was a casualty of that. Beautiful, beautiful theater. Next one. Still houses these wonderful murals inside. These are on canvas and glued to the wall. Next one. This one across the inner lobby from the one you just saw. This is just a small portion of them. Yes? Oh, sure. I was a little concerned about sight lines, but as long as you guys are good. Okay, next, please. Now we're going to move into Santa Cruz County here. At the time of the Del Mar opening, there had already been, both in Santa Cruz and Watsonville, a number of little Nickelodeon theaters that had opened and closed. I mean, the ones in downtown Santa Cruz, there was the Jewel, the Grand, the Cameo, a legitimate theater called the Unique, originally called Swain's Theater, that became the Unique. And it was, as you face the Del Mar, it was immediately to the left of it, where that wonderful little one-story terracotta deco building is now. It closed at the same time as the Del Mar opened. This is in Watsonville. This was the State Theater in Watsonville, designed by William Weeks, who did the Santa Cruz Casino and Holy Cross Church and tons of Victorian houses. And his career continued on into the 30s, doing deco like the Palomar Hotel and the De Anza in San Jose and others. But this was a William Weeks theater, one of the few movie vaudeville houses he ever did. He did lots of high school auditoriums. But this remained a movie theater until 1967. And then it became a warehouse for Ford's department store. This theater did not need to be torn down. Ford's was made of brick, and they did have to knock it down. But they wanted a new warehouse, so it was a casualty of that. You're seeing the marquee that Fox West Coast Theaters put on it in the 1930s. And I was in there just before it was torn down, and there was still stuff on the walls and ceiling, even chandeliers still in place, draped in cobwebs. All right, next, please. And the Fox in Watsonville, designed in 1923 by G. Albert Landsberg, who would later go on to do the interior of the San Francisco Opera House, the Golden Gate and Warfield in San Francisco. And then, I'm not sure who the architect was, but in 1931, it got a new front. It might have been Balch and Stanbury. They did a lot of mission-style theaters in the Central Valley. They put this tower on there originally. It had a nice vertical sign reading Fox. If you've ever seen the Fox Theater in Salinas, it looked like that. And then this was a later marquee put on when Main Street was widened, and they had to put a new marquee, so they brought up S. Charles Lee from Los Angeles to design a marquee. And this was the first theater that I was ever involved with back when I was at Cabrillo College. And I did some posters for when they brought the Santa Cruz Symphony and the Cabrillo Community Chorus, which my mom used to be part of, live on stage, on the vaudeville stage, and the acoustics were terrific. Next picture. Quick look at the interior of the Watsonville Fox with its original 1923 organ grill. This is one of the chambers. So if you go into an old theater that you know was a movie theater and there's some sort of arch on either side of the stage, or an arch with a curtain or a grill in it, you're in a silent movie house, because that's where the organ pipes were. So if you go to the Golden State Theater in Monterey, you'll see that. I was involved with the restoration there, both volunteer and professional, over many, many years, home away from home for a while. But this I took back in 1984, just before that first big concert they had there. Little bit of 1940s redecoration on the sidewalls, tropical birds amid foliage. Fox Theaters did that a lot. Next one. And then in Santa Cruz, you had the Santa Cruz Theater, still standing, done by Reed Brothers Architects. They were the most prolific theater architects in the greater Bay Area, and that was 1920. And then they're advertising the unique theater. And at that time, they were still, this is the 1931, they were still advertising it as the unique Vitaphone theater. And Vitaphone was a sound on record, sound on disc technique of getting sound on movies. And if you've ever seen Singin' in the Rain, 1950s movie, but they talk about that, and there's some humor that's based on the sound getting out of sync and all sorts of fun stuff. But anyway, Vitaphone was the technique, the patented process before they actually put film on to sound on the film itself. Okay, next one. And just, they used to put these schedules out. And look how often the movies change per week. I mean, you've got several shows a week. That was the output. When 90% of all Americans went out to the movies at least once a week, the product that came out, was amazing. And don't worry if you can hardly recognize any of these titles, because most movies that ever were made don't exist anymore. Next one. And the Santa Cruz. Reed Brothers design. Around 1930, it got this new vertical sign, a product of what Golden State theaters put on their theaters. The Golden State in Monterey got a new vertical sign just like this one that said Golden State and later was shortened to State. They literally cut the top of the sign off and gave it a new crown. And if you go there today, these ribs here are still there. They were all outlined in neon. You can still look carefully and see the housings. When we first moved to Santa Cruz, when I was 10, in 1973, this was still on the building. The whole building was olive green because Art Deco had fallen out of fashion, and the trend was everything must look as it is of the earth. It must be organic. And Art Deco is plastic and stainless steel and gold, and we don't want that. Anyway, unfortunately, that tower was taken down. I remember the little stars and crescents at the top. And at the time, other than the Aptos twin, because we lived in Aptos, I was like, I'm from originally LA. My dad worked down there on cartoons and stuff. And I thought, where the heck do we go to the movies? I'd been going to the Crest and the Belmont in Long Beach and went to the premiere of Charlotte's Web in Westwood. My dad worked on that movie, the one time I ever got to go to a premiere. I was like, where are these theaters with the towers and the neon and all that stuff that are so cool? Where are we? I hadn't seen the Del Mar yet. Well, I wasn't disappointed when I walked in, and we'll get there later. But anyway, very sad that that tower is gone. It was a nice, modeled right after the exhibition on Treasure Island, the 1939-1940 Golden Gate International Exposition, after the Court of the Moon, and this, and then a theater in Orinda, which is still there, fortunately. Okay, next one. Now, here's the Del Mar's sister theater, and if you're familiar with the Del Mar facade, you'll see it has the same grooves and little fluting along the front, so that when the neon animates, it causes sort of a changeable, multicolored curtain across the facade. This one, in addition to the name being different, has a rectangular marquee instead of a trapezoid. And a word about trapezoid marquees. The mid-30s was when trapezoid marquees came into use, because S. Charles Lee, an architect out of Los Angeles, who lived long enough to actually restore some of his own work, he came upon the idea, and it might have been by committee, we don't know, but he gets credited for it, of that if people, cars, more people have cars, you're zooming down the street, you got to be able to see what's playing really quickly. So if it's at an angle, there you go. So you have trapezoids coming in, and the Del Mar was right at that pivotal point. Cascade didn't get it, but the Del Mar did. So, next one. And the Cascade has a drinking fountain just like the Del Mar. Different colored tile. Del Mar is, as I recall, a lighter blue and dark blue. And there's the stairway, slightly different detail on the gilding under the treads. Now, the Cascade is a little bit more kind of angular deco, and the Del Mar is a little softer, and we'll get that into that in a little bit. Next one. Now, this is a picture of the Cascade's ceiling mural in the auditorium. And when I was at the Cascade, I took some photos that were flash, and the gilding reflected back at me and everything, but I chose this one for today because this brings me back to the memories of how I remember the Del Mar ceiling, both before and after the plexing. Subdued lighting with these wonderful figures looking kind of soft and mysterious. also with a nice nicotine patina on them, which adds an extra layer of spooky. But this is how the Del Mar ceiling looked to me when I was a kid. It was like this. And so I would look at that before the show started and, kind of wonder who painted that and why? What are those figures? I knew my Greek mythology, but I couldn't, find Athena or Aphrodite or whatever. Why did they do this? Whatever it is, it's cool. So anyway, we'll move along. Next image. And of course, the inaugural program, I'm fortunate to have 2 of them, thanks to a couple of late friends who gave me their extra copies. And I love it how it has an idealized rendering of the Del Mar lobby. Look at the chandeliers. And then we've got, the Neptune Plunge and the Coconut Grove Ballroom there, as they looked, of course, around 1936 with the obelisks and the little pergola on top and everything like that. Next one. And that shimmering metallic finish that the program has. It's a nice big thing. Anyway, but I want to get into, the Del Mar is an Art Deco building. It belongs in that context. But it is mainly Art Deco in the overall massing of the elements, a little bit of machine age, a little bit of futurism with the vertical grooves and the division of space, large unadorned sections and then tightly detailed smaller sections, okay? But notice here, William Chavalis, who was in charge of the decorative scheme, and then Saleh Brothers were the contractors. No architect. Every now and then you get a theater with no architect. You get contractors, a whole bunch of subcontractors, and a decorator, and the people who literally put up the frame and concrete. So this is William. He worked with Timothy Pfluger, apprenticed under him at one point, from what I understand, the guy who did the Oakland Paramount that you saw earlier. Let's see, yes, okay. The modern empire motif. Back then, they didn't call it Art Deco, and modern empire isn't quite Deco. It's in the context. It's sort of a subgroup. Art Deco as a term came out in the 1960s when the first retrospective on the style was held in New York, and it came from, I'm going to mangle the French, but l'Exposition des Arts Décoratifs Industriels et Modernes, which happened in 1925 in Paris and spread that style all over the globe. And so anyway, we can thank William for the decorative work, but modern empire is referring to Europe and especially the age of Napoleon, when the Baroque Rococo of Italy and France simplified and idealized Greek and Roman motifs and formalized them. Furniture from the time of Napoleon, whether it's Egyptian revival or Greek or Roman revival, is simplified, and it has this elegance that almost is like a precursor to Deco. So let's go to the next one. Okay. And so we're looking at these. These are very recent pictures that my friend Sue took. Yay. Thank you. Because my pictures were taken with an older camera, and they were grainy. So anyway, here you have these Art Deco chandeliers, which are like 98% Art Deco. The only empire detail is the Roman scepters on the corners made of sheet metal with these arrows pointing through them. And there's a Latin word for those, and sorry, I don't remember it. But you have the Greek key design and things like crossed spears. There are busts of goddesses. You've got the lady with the swirl around her. And we'll go on to the next one. A little bit more up close. And the shell design, of course, partly that's a Greco-Roman decorative device, but shells, Del Mar by the sea, it's appropriate for the area. But it's softer than the high deco, the angular zigzag type material. By the way, and some of you can tell and probably know already, this is just a creative use of the underside of the balcony, because this is where the main structural girders come through. And these steps here are a decorative cover over the poured concrete risers for the seats upstairs. Next one. And most of us were up on the mezzanine a little while ago, so we have a little view here. Not to trivialize one single detail of the Del Mar, because it all works together. But they did occasionally do catalog orders. There's a theater up in Chico that has this same railing done by William Chavalis. He specified this. and the remodel of the Harding Theater in San Francisco on Divisadero, which is now a sort of a nightclub type spot now, and renovated, still has on its staircases these same railings. Next one. Okay, so thanks to Golden State Theaters employing a gentleman who had been a theater manager himself, Theodore or Ted Newman, during World War II, there was the concern that the Axis powers, primarily Japan, but it could be anybody, could launch an invasion of the West Coast and our cities might be toast, or at least partially so. So Ted Newman was sent around in 1942 and 43 to photograph all the theaters in the chain, Northern California, Central California, and a little bit of Nevada. And if it weren't for him, there would be a lot fewer interior shots of a lot of these theaters, because these weren't the giant theaters of LA and San Francisco, which had professional photographers document them when they were built. But these oftentimes, it was kind of hit or miss, at least as far as the archives tell us. So here's the Del Mar in 1942. Now, one thing I gotta say is I don't remember the pattern on the valance there of the original curtain, but I do remember prior to 1977 when I saw Dumbo and That Darn Cat. I'm sorry, you got to see, this beautiful South Pacific, epic, and I saw Dumbo. Now, my dad worked on Dumbo, so don't, he was new at Disney at the time. Anyway, but I do remember something decorative being up there on the curtain. It was not that bright. Nicotine, okay? Don't remember the bottom part. Was it striped? I don't know. But anyway, but I do remember the chandeliers. So it is the Del Mar. But yeah, my memory of these chandeliers mainly is from after the plexing and only a few uplights were on. And so I do remember looking up and seeing an octagonal shape, and then at the very bottom was a cylinder with a spear point, and then there was a disc of glass with a six-pointed star in etched glass at the very bottom with light bulbs behind it. So that's the extent of my memory of it. I never got to sit in the balcony, unfortunately, pre-77. One final thing about this picture is if one wanted to do a complete reconstruction of the ceiling mural and you wanted to get the proportions, and I'm not a CAD guy, not a computer guy really, but you could do a wireframe over all the borders over there and then tilt it up because it was a completely symmetrical design, and then build your elements in there from whatever photographs exist. Anyway, we'll go on to the next image. Now, what the heck is this? Well, it's another William Chavalis design. It's in Petaluma, and it was a remodel of a 19th century brick opera house, which later became the T&D Theater, and then later the Fox California Theater. Today is called the Phoenix. It's a youth center and underground band concert hall. And they're allowed, the people that have kind of a membership there, the owner lets them do graffiti pieces on the walls and all this other stuff. But this stuff up in here is sacred. It has a 1980s color scheme, kind of mauve and gray and some gold. But it's Chavalis at work again. Similar to the Del Mar, very much. And that same modern empire style. I mean, here's that border that is up on the mezzanine, up on the ceiling, and other places inside the Del Mar. Different treatment over the screen, but you've also got the ladies as well. Next one. And then looking into the opening night program. So 1936, the theater opens. Now, we heard a little bit about the fact that there is a stage fly tower in there. In fact, I remember asking my dad, and he was older than most of my peers' fathers. He remembered vaudeville and live music accompanying silent movies when he was a little kid. Palace Theater, Waterbury, Connecticut, 4,000 seats, beautiful, still there. But when they did these presentations at these movie palaces, they were called unit stage shows or unit presentations. And each item on the bill was considered a unit, and they all had numbers. So here's the Del Mar opening with just screen entertainment, other than some speeches and things said from the stage. But they still call it units. So unit number 1, Paramount News, I won't read the whole thing, but everything is a unit, just as if you had movie and vaudeville, so-and-so comedians, such and such chorus girls, the Fanchon and Marco Sun-Kissed Beauties, various other things that they performed on stage, just as if it were a full vaudeville thing, because this was a high-class house, and they were hoping that eventually it would be not simply a movie theater, that someday it would once again host stage entertainment. And it did. In the 1940s, and I don't remember my source, but I did read it in a contemporary publication, that various touring big bands, and I recognized some of the names, did appear on stage on the same bill as whatever the feature movie was in the 40s. And then some people may remember, I was too young, but there were rock concerts in the 60s and 70s. I believe the final concert was by the Tubes, I'm not sure. But that's what I recall. And then the plexing happened. So the stage was usable, is usable, it's still there. So that's really exciting. So the structure is there for that kind of thing. You could fly a movie screen up, and that's what they did as late as the 70s. That screen was on a frame, it lifted up, with the curtains closed, so you wouldn't see the magic. You don't see the mechanics. And then it would open up onto a stage, and then there would be an act there. Next one. And just up close. And I have never seen Mickey Mouse in the Alpine Climbers, but anyway, I've seen clock cleaners though. That is a hilarious one. That's with Goofy, but anyway. Next one. All right, so a little bit me and the Del Mar growing up. So as I mentioned, the first time I went there was with my dad, because he had told me some things to notice in Del Mar that he remembered. And so we went to see Del Mar, and that, Del Mar, yeah, we went to see Del Mar. We sure did. We went to see Dumbo and That Darn Cat, and then a few months later I went for my friend Scott's birthday party. We saw a couple of other things. Oh, Gus and Bambi, that's right. Then the place got plexed, and I didn't know what had happened. Didn't much care. I was a kid, about 12. And went in to see Watership Down with my parents and some family friends. And I was like, wait a minute, where's the other gold lady? Because I used to look at the ladies on either side of the screen, and they always seemed to be looking at me like, be good, or else the wrath of William Chavalis will come down. No, I didn't know who he was then. But anyway, this is the first picture I ever took of the Del Mar, and it was the first night that I ever paid attention to what lit up still. And the vertical sign in one circuit, green, said Delm, and it was that way for years. And in my childhood naivete, I found out the UA corporate office, and I wrote to Larry Levin, and I said, I realize fixing neon is really expensive because you could just allocate cash for the A and the R. It said Delm for years. And I later met somebody who knew Larry Levin, and he said, oh yeah, he wouldn't have answered a letter like that, no. Anyway, so here's the beautiful magnolia trees, and this is how much neon was working at the time. And I still remember, and I would have forgotten this, but my cousin was with me at the time, 5 years younger than me, kind of like my little brother. And he remembers we came around a corner, and my first words were, it's green! Well, I didn't know about neon. I thought because the marquee was yellow and white and red, that the neon would be yellow and white and red. Well, Greg King, who's here tonight, who restored the Del Mar's neon, found some of the original colors. I mean, when it first opened, there was silver, there was gold, there was green. Any other colors I'm missing?
Of the painting?
Yeah, on the marquee.
And black.
And black, yeah.
It was very Metropolis.
Very Metropolis, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Really deco. This color scheme is what, of course, most of us remember, maybe all of us. Yeah, it had its, it was keeping with the times. Next one. We'll kind of go through these 1982 photos. These are from slides. Remember those? And next one, up close with the. I got to tell you, and this, Greg has a broken one of these shells at his house, and I am not a glass bender. The most I have done is draw full-size patterns in pencil for neon signs, and the bending that goes into these shells is just amazing, back and around and back and around. And you have to think every turn and think backwards because you do most of the neon as if you were inside the sign looking out. So, which is fun when it comes to letters, right? Okay, so anyway, 1982. What's really fun here is for many years, in 1985, UA took the neon down off the bottom border because now that they had trimmed back the trees some, and they were going to use the marquee again, so it wouldn't just say Del Mar for bargain matinees daily, and then midnight shows. And then on this side, it would always say late shows, fry and sat. Because they couldn't use the marquee. It was a pigeon roost. So anyway, but it does record some of the neon at the bottom. Next one. Yeah, this is the last one. And last one in this series. And as a kid, I looked up at this and I'm like, so things are burned out. Why is it so perfectly balanced? Why is every other one out? Well, the flasher for animation was not functioning. And so that's why the every other tube. Okay, next one. And there are the ladies again, and just taken in recent years after the restoration. So it was fun to see them again after so many years of them being in the dark. Next one. And once again, our ceiling and what I used to think of it. I actually talked a little bit more about it earlier. Go ahead, next one. This is a sketch I did in 1983 before seeing the movie Sophie's Choice. This is one of the ladies that was on the ceiling. There were 4 of them, and they went around the central rosette. Ladies pouring water in terracotta and beige. Next one. And my own personal involvement in the Del Mar thus far has been when it reopened, I provided new etched glass restroom signs, men and ladies. And I was happy to see today that ladies and men are both still there. Next one. No, it never said gents here. I know. El Rey and Salinas, which is what I'm working on, that one said gents. Next one. And of course, in its neon glory here, of course, it was animating at the time, so the green circuit was off. But there it is going. Next one. And this is in our guest bathroom at home. I framed the poster from the 2002 reopening. Fun story about Beverly Roberts. I got to meet her that night, as did many people. But totally coincidentally, it turned out she belonged to the same church in Southern California that a close family friend, who I called my adopted grandmother, and one other friend belonged to. So every time I would visit them, they would always make sure that Beverly and I would meet up. And I'm like, hey, Del Mar Theater, Santa Cruz, remember me? Oh, yeah. Da-da-da. And she was so sweet, so unpretentious and just warm. And then, she passed on, and I was notified after that several years later. But nice little memory of Beverly. Next one. And final story, back of the Del Mar, synchronicity. My wife and I are over here for some reason, and a big boom was up, and the back of the stage house, the sign was being repainted. I called up to the guy and I said, hey, in 1985, they made a mistake. The bottom left-hand corner of the A needs to be filled in. It's blacked out. And he says, my truck is open. Take my card. It's on the dashboard, and let's be in touch. So I had a picture from 1982 that showed the back that could prove that from before it was repainted. And next one. Sometimes little dreams are the best ones and they come true. I got to see this white triangle here restored after all those years. And then later he painted the diving lady and the redwood trees. This sign, by the way, was not on there when the Del Mar first opened. The whole auditorium was just, the outside of it was gray concrete. The opening day photo shows that, and that was an interesting thing to see. It was only the white on the front and on the returns, as far back as the sculpture went. And I believe that's our last image of the building. One more, please. And, you stand on the shoulders of giants, images, all the different people, and a little bit of extra thank you. And I wanted to thank my friend Sue Crevitt for putting me in touch with Tracy. And Sue's a very special person in my life. And thank you all so much.